Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have people in the audience, we have people joining us virtually, and people joining us from a simulcast, which we've never done before, in South Bay. So I'm Megan Houston. I'm with the Palm Beach County's Office of Resilience. We've been an office since 2018, fully staffed with 3 people. We're really excited to have you here and participate as we go through planning for our future, looking at climate change threats and impacts from flooding to extreme heat to stronger storms. We want to combine technical expertise that we get from the modeling and the engineers with real life experience. What do we know about our neighborhoods and how that rainfall affects our neighborhood assets? That's what we're starting to do with this evening's conversation, kickstarting it off in Belle Glade. We are joined by a team of consultants and experts, as well as you, to have these community conversations. With that, just thank you again for being here. Please get food. Natalie brought the food, so everyone thank her and help her enjoy what she brought. And I will turn it over to Georgia. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Georgia Vince. I'm with Tetra Tech, and our team was selected to run this study. Tonight, really quick, our agenda is quickly, I'll introduce our team. We'll talk about the project background, the purpose of the study that we're about to embark upon. We'll give you a project overview, a timeline or our project schedule. And then we want to hear from you about your community values, what's important to you, and we really look forward to your feedback. We'll have question and answers at the end of the presentation. So if you could hold your questions to the end, that would be great. And South Bay, if you could just enter questions in the chat or let us know you have questions at the end, and we'll be happy to respond to those as well. Again, my name is Georgia Vince. I'm with Tetra Tech, and we have a team with us here today. Aaron Dede, Brazaga is here helping with the tech support and getting all the technology going. S.A. Nelson and Associates, their team is here helping bring the community to us, and we really appreciate that. Chen Moore and Associates is another engineering firm that we've teamed with to support the project. And Clearview Geographic is a small business that we've worked with on climate change and vulnerability projects before, and they do a lot of the modeling efforts. So just as a quick refresher, I wanted to show this little video, it's only about a minute long, about climate change and the causes and effects.
As a result of the Industrial Revolution that kicked off in the mid-1700s, the Earth's surface is warming up at a never-seen-before rate. A major reason for the rise in temperatures is the increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. These cause our planet to retain heat from the sun. Greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane are released into the atmosphere when fossil fuels are burned. Trees and oceans absorb carbon dioxide, but can't handle the large amounts that are now building up in the Earth's atmosphere. And because our forests are shrinking, even less carbon dioxide is absorbed. The high levels of carbon dioxide are already acidifying oceans, killing off coral reefs. It's also triggering a dangerous rise in sea levels and an increase in extreme weather events. Around the world and across Europe, innovators are now racing against the clock to invent new ways to live in our cities, use land, manufacture products, and run our businesses. New innovations are bringing down greenhouse gas emissions to confront climate change and its threat to our health and our economies, while creating new, sustainable growth and jobs.
Okay, so bringing it back to the local environment, the climate threats that we're experiencing here in Florida and Palm Beach County specifically include flooding, when an area becomes overwhelmed with too much water due to heavy rainfall, extreme drought, where the temperatures rise and remain high for extended periods of time. And did I say drought? I meant heat, extreme heat. Pretty much what we're experiencing now in Florida and throughout parts of the country. Drought is a prolonged period of time with reduced rainfall. Severe storms include heavy rainfall, lightning, tornadoes, strong winds, and hail. And then, of course, the hurricanes and tropical storms are getting more powerful and more intense, including several Category 5 storms that we've experienced recently. We also have significant coastal erosion in Palm Beach County. I'll touch base on that in a little bit, but that's caused by extensive wind and waves. And then wildfires, they spread rapidly and are uncontrolled across the landscape and often cause air quality and human health issues. So what do we do about climate change and how do we become resilient to that? We can adapt by preparing for and adjusting to the climate change impacts. We can mitigate the effects by reducing or fixing the cause to the climate change. And we can work on sustainable development, meeting the community's growth needs, and protecting future generations. So the key drivers for the project is that climate threats, as I mentioned, are a range of risks that we're already experiencing and will also need to look at into the future. Since 1886, we've had 57 hurricanes near Palm Beach County, and Palm Beach County has 11 eroded shorelines, which includes 35 miles of our approximately 47 total miles of coast. So there are areas of increased risk, and we know that impacts homes, human health, business, infrastructure, and Palm Beach County is working proactively to address these climate threats. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Erin Deedy to walk through some project background and project specifics.
Good evening, everybody. So the state of Florida has been working on climate change for several years also. And one of the things that it's done very exponentially in the past couple of years is start putting resources into local communities to help them adapt or mitigate to these impacts. And so that's what this project is about. And what are we going to do? Like, what is the background of this project? Well, we're going to do a risk assessment and we're going to create a resilience action plan. Those are big words and it sounds like a lot of stuff, but really what we're going to do first is evaluate the different types of climate threats that we have in Palm Beach County. As Georgia briefly mentioned, we know that if you look at the press right now, we're seeing a lot of really high heat days. We have a lot of meteorologists in Miami talking about, the perceived air temperature when you go outside. It's hotter than it's been in a long, long time. And we're making records in this like every day now in South Florida. But we're going to develop a plan to help the county deal with some of these issues from a safety perception issue, and also to prepare for these different impacts that we talked about, like wildfires and heat, drought, that type of thing. We want to set the county up to be able to participate in what's called the statewide flooding and sea level rise resilience plan. And what that mouthful of gobbledygook basically says is that each year the state of Florida accepts grant applications to rank these types of projects to deal specifically with flood risk. And so if we do well with those grant applications, we can potentially get some money out of the state of Florida to help implement those projects. And that's what that state planning effort is about. And so our local planning effort feeds into that so we can be successful in securing those dollars. And so what this does also is it's going to survey the different efforts that are going on from the federal government, the state government, regional governments, and try to make them cohesive in what our response is. And this is going to be very data driven and kind of technical and look at a lot of information, but our job is also to communicate that back to the community in a way that they can understand. No? Ah, there we go. I went on the light. Okay, so the purpose of the project let's concentrate on the words in bold. We are going to assess the unincorporated county area, the western municipalities, and anything that the county owns and maintains, because that's what we as taxpayers are responsible for. So we want to make sure that that infrastructure functions and protects people against different risks like flooding. We're going to measure the impacts of climate risk on the area and identify at what level different pumps or roads or drainage drainage ditches or other infrastructure may be impacted. And then we need to prioritize the response. And there are a lot of different ways that the county looks at response to these types of efforts through emergency management planning and different policy initiatives, but we want to prioritize how we're going to combat these effects over time. Identify resources. We need to identify funding sources. I talked about grants. That's one way, but there may be other ways. And those resources may also be staffing needs, not just hard cash. We want to understand the magnitude. For instance, is this something that a lot of people rely upon? If it's a pump station and it floods a lot and the pump station fails, how many people are going to be affected by that? And that's a really important thing to understand. We're also going to look at what the county's contribution to the problem is. For instance, how much in terms of energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, and how we can potentially lower that, make our county buildings and facilities more efficient. And then finally, set us up, because if we are going to be successful in seeking what we call other people's money through the federal or state government, we need to have a plan of attack. And that's what we are developing through this project. So components, what are we responsible for doing? Well, we have a grant work plan with the state of Florida, and it requires us to do certain things. We're not just kind of making this up as we go. We have to provide certain deliverables back to the state of Florida. So we are in the process right now of collecting a lot of data. What kind of data are we collecting? Well, we want to know where the county owns its roads, its buildings, its facilities, its pumps, all of the type of stuff. So we put that in a database, because if we know where those things are, then we know how they may be impacted by those different climate effects over time. We're here tonight to do some outreach and engagement with you. So we hope you will participate with us and give us, areas that flood or areas that are problematic. We're going to identify those different climate hazards. We're going to do a risk analysis with those different facilities and buildings and pump stations and roads that we're collecting data about. We're going to prepare a climate action plan. And the important part is what to do about it, which is identifying those adaptation strategies. And then we have a technical report we have to send back to the state, and then we have to drill that down and communicate that to the public and the elected leadership and across the staff of the various departments of the county. So we're all kind of rowing in the same direction on how to deal with this. So what are the elements of climate change? Well, we have risk, and that is the degree of effect that a certain element of climate change may pose. And the one we mostly talk about right now is flooding. Flooding impacts the coast, but it also impacts the inland communities, because there may be areas that are really low. If you ever notice you come out during a rain event and you can't drive down the road because it takes a while to drain, that is climate change, and that is impacting your neighborhood, your community, your roads, your infrastructure. So we need to know how bad that impact is. The sensitivity is how many people depend on that. It's one thing if a road is flooded and only one person or two people live on that road, but it's another thing if the road is flooded and 100 people live on that road and they need to use that road to get to work or pick up their kids from school. It becomes a sensitivity issue. How sensitive is the population to that risk? And then what is our ability to respond? Do we have the resources? Do we need to develop a project? Do we need to develop a program? Like, what is our ability to deal with that impact to that particular risk for infrastructure or a community? And so what makes this unique? What makes this study unique? A lot of people study these things, but they don't necessarily use the localized information of the community, like the localized roads. We can make maps and we can look at where the water is going to go, but you want to know what's there when the water is going to be there. And that's why we collect all of this county data. There are a lot of data sources out there that talk about the fact that we're going to have more heat, but how many heat days are we going to have down here? Like, what can we project into the future? And then we do the scenario that I call we blow it all up. We add rainfall, we add in the coastal communities, storm surge and sea level rise, and look at the compound of these effects together, and what that means and how that is exacerbated by adding different climate impacts and stressors over time. And then we're going to look at all of the various assets that we've collected information on, prioritize those assets, and we will develop some conceptual projects. So we have some ideas and things ready to go when some of these grant opportunities come up. We have more outreach and more community feedback. This is kind of the first wave to start the conversation going and provide some base information. And then planning and leadership. What are we going to do about it? And then we need to present that to the county commission to start making some decisions and priorities. What are the types of critical assets? Again, as I've mentioned, the state tells us how to do some of this vulnerability planning. And it also tells us that we have to look at a very large swath of different types of assets. We have to look at transportation facilities. We have to look at critical infrastructure, which are things like drainage, water lines, wastewater lines. We have to look at critical facilities, schools, buildings. This building, for instance, this building may be high enough, but during a really extreme rain event, the roads may be flooded to get to it. So we have to look at the interactions of all of those things together. And then finally, we have to look at our natural, cultural, and historic resources. Those can be a little bit challenging to get our arms around. Natural areas are kind of big and amorphous, but they play a very important role in our ability to mitigate the impacts of climate change, but also from a water resource management standpoint. So we need to evaluate all those different types of assets, and that's why we have so much data that we have to collect. And then we have certain scenarios. They want us to not just look at what's happening with the rainfall today, but they want us to look at different rainfall events, like the 1 in 100 year rain event or the 1 in 500 year rain event. Does anybody remember like all the press on the big rain event in April in Fort Lauderdale? In some areas, that was like a 1 in 1,000 year event storm. But those are kind of definitions that are weird. It's hard to get your brains around how FEMA defines these events. But the thing that we know is that these larger rain events that we don't necessarily predict, because they're not a named hurricane, they're happening more and more often. And that's taxing our infrastructure, and that's impacting people every day in their lives. And then we have to kind of add all those events up together in certain scenarios and see what the effect is. Because I couldn't imagine what that rainfall event would have been like at an extreme high tide and a hurricane, happening at the same time, or a full moon or something like that. So, some of those events can have a exacerbated effect upon each other. So then we have to organize all of this information in a map series to identify where all those assets are. We will collect the data, not just from the county, but the state has a lot of data. The federal government has a lot of data, believe it or not. One of the data sources that we've looked at has been the federal government to find out where things like gas stations are and banks, things that you need access to when there is an emergency. So we pull all of these different data sources together so we make sure that we have really good coverage of all of those assets. And then we model them, we evaluate them, and we want to make sure that the tools we use to do that are not some weird, expensive tool that we can't talk about what goes into the model, because a lot of times people want to know, how did you evaluate the impacts of all of these different flood scenarios on our drainage structures? Well, we use these what's called open source tools where anybody can access them, and then we can provide the background information on the technical approach if people want that. And so then an action plan. Now, we're not focusing on every single asset in the entire county. We know that Palm Beach County is huge. east to west, north to south. So we have to prioritize. And right now, this first wave of prioritization is on the county assets, what they own and maintain, or what we call regionally significant assets, where it's something that maybe it's a county building within the city of Belle Glade or something like that, where more than one governmental entity may rely upon that. And then we're going to identify some projects and options on how to prevent those impacts from occurring, what that project feasibility may be, what are the priorities. I mean, sometimes it's really hard to have that conversation. So we're going to be relying on community input. You know, our information may show us that a wastewater lift station is really important in terms of adaptation, but that is not as important to somebody if they can't get down their road, 30 days a year because of flood risk. And that may be more important to them. And so that's why we need to hear from the community. It's very important when we prioritize these projects. And again, constantly trying to communicate with the community to get that feedback. And now I'm going to shift back to Georgia.
All right, thank you. So the project, as Erin mentions, we have a lot of deliverables that are grant driven. We have a lot of requirements that we have to meet in order to qualify for those grants. And so the first thing that we're going to prepare is a climate risk assessment that will look at the exposure and sensitivity and identify and summarize the risks. And so then the risk action plan will identify adaptation strategies for a countywide action plan. We're also going to develop some mapping tools that will be available on the internet to visualize flooding and sea level rise impacts. And then it'll also include a data dashboard so everyone can have access to and see where all the data sources are from. As we mentioned, we're going to prioritize the project list with community input. We'll identify the projects, evaluate their effectiveness, and ensure that we recommend solutions that are practical and cost effective. And lastly, we'll provide, for those strategies that we identify, we'll provide estimated timeline, cost estimates, and social equity considerations. So the key takeaway from today's presentation is that we all know that Palm Beach County will be affected by these climate threats. There are areas in the community that are of increased risk, and Palm Beach County has been proactively addressing climate change to further reduce these risks and align resources with needs of the community. Our project timeline today is our first community workshop. We plan to have a draft climate risk assessment by November. We'll have another community workshop after that. The final climate risk assessment, we're looking at February, and then we'll jump into the risk action plan in April. Again, we'll have some more community workshops, and the draft climate risk action plan is scheduled for July of 2025. And then by December of 2025, we'll have a final community-wide resiliency action plan and some more community presentations. So as Erin mentioned, I mentioned before, we really are looking for your feedback. We have some posters around the back of the room that can help us prioritize your concerns within the community, if you care to give feedback that way. And then we also have a community survey. It's available here on the iPads, or if you have, there's a QR code at the front desk, and there's also some hard copies if you don't want to use the iPads. We really think that survey will provide us with a lot of really good data to support the study. We also have comment cards in the back of the room if you'd like to provide a written comment or direction or any thoughts on the project. And for project information and updates, you can visit the county's website at the resiliency address there. So other than that, we are here to take your questions. We look forward to interacting with you with the posters and the survey. And with that, I will leave it to my team to bring the mic around the room and for any questions that anybody may have. Thank you.